This is what we're going to cover. So let me just, here we are. We're going to look at why the quality of your attention really determines and impacts the quality of other people's thinking. We'll look at why we interrupt, and I'll give you some tips on how we might want to stop ourselves. But I'll also share why it's so important that we don't interrupt if we want people to think well. I'm going to share with you a number of different ways we can listen, and there's lots of different ways you can sort of frame up listening. And this is sort of a synthesis of different ways. And I think it can just be really useful to know there are different ways of listening and why we might choose to listen in different ways at different times. We'll have a look at the beautiful generative power of silence and why it's really, really important. And then I thought I might just share with you a couple of tips about paying better attention. For those of you that don't know me, for those of you that do, this will be old news. But I am a teacher of and member of the global faculty for Time to Think. And really what that means is I teach a lot of the courses. So I'm able to qualify coaches and facilitators and teachers in the approach, which is called the thinking environment. And I've been doing that now for 12 years. So I used to work in a big global company out when I lived in Australia, but for the last 12 years I've been self-employed, purely teaching the thinking environment work, and that's the core of what I do. So I now live with my husband and my two little kids out in the Peak District in Derbyshire, which I love. But so for the last 12 years I've been working for myself, but before that I've always worked in leadership roles. So from university I went into the Royal Navy. I've run restaurants, I've managed teams, but there's always been a theme of, I suppose, leading through change and helping people and organisations transform. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. So we will start. So I really sort of wanted to ground us into attention. And as I said, it's one of the 10 components of a thinking environment. And that means it's one of the core things we know needs to be present if we want people to think really, really well for themselves. And so we know, like, the one thing that children need or babies need, apart from, shelter and food, if they are to develop well as children, is sustained attention of an adult. And we know that in children, we know that about childhood development. And we're the same as adults. Like, in order to flourish, in order to thrive, in order to reach our own potential, we need to be given and granted attention. And I think, unlike children, as adults, we just get used to not getting it. And so if one of my kids wants attention and they don't get it, I'll know quite quickly, what the impact of that is. But I think as adults, we tend to hide that need maybe more easily, but we still really need it. And so in a thinking environment, we define attention as listening with palpable interest. So listening with palpable interest and without interruption. And both of those two parts are really important. And when I was preparing for this, I really wanted to think about, like, we talk about attention a lot. And then I was like, but do we actually really know what it feels like? So when I talk about it, it sounds quite cognitive, it sounds like it's something I'm doing. And yet actually my experience of attention is very much a grounding into a way of being. And so when I asked you earlier, like, where is your attention? Like, for most of us, I think most of the time, we've got no idea, really. Like, it's fragmented, it's on a task, it's being pulled in multiple directions, it's quite distracted, it's sort of a bit, disjointed, for want of a better word. But when we think about attention in the thinking environment, it's a really active thing. So when we use this word palpable, like, attention isn't a passive placing of attention on something. It's a really palpable and energized focusing of our attention on somebody else. So we really bring ourselves fully into our presence. So we bring ourselves and our mind and our attention into presence with somebody else. And when we do that, when we really presence our attention and we're really energized behind it, it has a really strong impact on somebody else. So they can really sense it, that you're interested, that you're engaged, that they're safe, that you want to be with them. And I often say in my courses, for me, when we pay attention, we become really good listeners. But the listening piece is a byproduct of being able to pay attention. And so to sort of bring this to life, or to at least allow you to sort of ground into it, I just wanted to do an exercise with you to show that. And so what I'm going to ask you to do, and you can do this with your eyes open or your eyes closed, it doesn't matter. But I want you to bring your attention now, or place your attention, and I'll do it with you. So I want you to place your attention on your left knee, for want of anywhere else, but just try and put all of your attention and all of your focus into your left knee. And then I want you to move that attention into your right hand. So imbue your right hand with your attention. So whatever it is that you moved, so whatever shifted or moved for you there from your left knee to your right hand, that is your attention. That's what we're talking about. And it's that when you're with somebody else, we're asking you to bring that focus, that attention to somebody else. But it should be, warm, noticeable, palpable. The palpable interest piece is keeping it curious, open, warm. And what we say in a thinking environment is that we guarantee that for as long as we have, we won't interrupt you. And we won't interrupt you in our words or in our body language or in our the conversation we have sort of in our own head. We won't allow that to interrupt your thoughts. And the reason this attention matters is because we are constantly looking for cues of safety and belonging and worthiness. And when somebody gets a sense of your warm, palpable, non-interrupted attention, what it says to somebody else is, you're safe, you belong, and I'm really interested in what you're thinking about, which is why it matters so much. So I'll just talk through one more slide and then I'll break and I can answer any questions on this. Let me just see if I wanted to say anything else. No, I'll come back to this. So one of the challenges of being able to give sustained attention over time is that we interrupt. So we're bad enough at interrupting ourselves and our own thinking, let alone being able to hold that attention on somebody else. And so I was, often thinking about, well, why do we interrupt? Like no one, I've never met anybody in all my years of training and teaching and leading teams, I've never met one person that has ever said they've enjoyed being interrupted. Not one. And yet we all do it. We all interrupt. And there's lots of reasons we interrupt. I often say that I think some people interrupt because they're rude, they're rude and they think they know best. But I think that's a tiny percentage of people. I think a lot of people interrupt because it's a way of showing empathy. It's a way of showing that they're engaged. We get worried that we're not going to remember what we're going to say if we don't say it now. And sometimes when we care deeply about something or someone, we worry that if we don't say what we're going to say then, that we might not get our turn. There's also something that feels really safe about talking. So I think for a lot of us, we like talking. You know, it feels like we're in control. It feels like we know the territory, and it feels like we're adding value. So I think often we interrupt because it feels like a way of helping other people. The other challenge, and I think one of the reasons we often interrupt, is that we get easily distracted when we're listening. And there's lots of reasons for this. Part of it is our response to what people are saying. But I think part of it is that we listen at a far faster rate than we're able to speak. So we listen we can listen to far more words than other people are able to speak. And so what happens is, as people are speaking, we will often be running ahead in our thinking about where they're going to go next or what they're going to do. So we fill in the micro gaps that are caused by our ability to listen quicker with our own commentary or with our own response or with our own stories or narrative about what might be happening. And so I think because we can hear so much more than we are hearing, we often then get distracted ourselves. And we will be more likely to then come in because the other person might not have finished a wave of thinking, but we've already moved on in our thinking. So it's almost like trying to keep up with our own internal narrative. Why else do we interrupt? I think there is a seductive idea that we're adding value. You know, we add value by what we do rather than by who we are or what we're creating. But what's most important about the interruption is, if I know I'm going to be interrupted, or if I sense I'm going to be interrupted, I will rush my thinking, or I will get to the point quicker, or I will not finish my sentences as well as I could, or I won't allow my thoughts to kind of freely explore themselves. I'll either quicken or shorten or judge or jump in much more quickly than I would naturally, unless I was allowed to have that space. And one of I think the real things that can help us to stop ourselves interrupting is the impact it has on the other person. So we don't, in some ways, not interrupt for us, you know, although I think it is a practice and a skill that's really worth developing. We don't interrupt because of the belonging and safety cues that it gives somebody else. So it allows somebody to feel like they matter. It allows somebody to feel like their thoughts are important. Because that's what interruption does. Interruption destroys those belonging cues. It's interpreted that what I want to say is more important than what you're going to say. And so it just subtly changes the dynamic in a group. The other thing I often say is often people think about interrupting as the verbal cues. So it might be a saying something or putting a hand up or coming in with something. But actually we can interrupt so much with not just our words, but our face, the questions that we might place on our face. If we look confused, somebody will read that confusion, and then they'll change what they're going to say. And so I think we have to be really mindful of is my body language, or am I just trying not to interrupt, in which case someone will know that, or is it that I actually don't want to interrupt? And I think that's the difference that we say in a thinking environment. It's not that I'm trying not to interrupt you, it's that I don't want to interrupt you, and that I won't interrupt you. And so we're both liberated from that sort of need or thinking that I might. In sort of English speaking Western cultures, the way that we show our attention and the way we don't interrupt is often by maintaining eye contact. That's not always culturally appropriate, but each culture will have its own way of showing interest and warmth and non-interruption in a culturally sensitive way. And so I think it's sometimes we don't need to know what all of those are, but we do want to make sure that we have asked and that we don't assume. And I wanted to put in a little bit here, and I will break in a moment, is one of the themes that runs through the work of the thinking environment is is this desire to not infantilize people. And by that, we mean not treating people like children. So us taking on a kind of a parenting, guiding role in somebody else's thinking. And so when we talk about not infantilizing people, it's really around saying that we won't treat people as children. And I think sometimes, even when it's really well-meaning and really well-intentioned, it comes from a really good-hearted place. Often when we're trying to give advice or tell someone what to do or share our experience, it can come from a place of almost sort of suggesting we would know better, or we've been there, or we've done something. And again, one of the things we gift someone when we don't interrupt them and we let them think fully through themselves is they start to develop this confidence in their own ability to think and work things out, and also make their own mistakes and learn their own way and in their own styles. So I think part of the, I'll just come off sharing, part of how to stop interrupting, in some ways, is just to make a commitment not to. And it's not going to be always, but it's noting when somebody is trying to think or you're trying to give your attention, that in that moment you say, you know, I'm not going to interrupt. And then just holding that and really practicing it. The other thing I think can really help us is to start becoming really aware of how interruption makes us feel. So if you're in conversation or you're trying to think through something and people are interrupting you, so they're giving you information or they're asking you questions, just start to sense how that makes you feel. So maybe just start to think, oh, how does that impact on me? But I'll just pause there to have a glug of water. But any questions, anything anyone wanted to share, or either share from their own experience or ask, as I do. See, you're all giving me such good attention now, no one will interrupt. Okay, I'll just come, let me just check what that was. All right, let me just share this again.
I think, Sophie,
Oh yeah.
Hi. I think for me, the whole thing around interrupting is appreciating that voice is quite powerful, and tone of voice, and so often we're not tuned into that even just interrupting with a word can have huge impacts on somebody, on their mood, and send all sorts of messages that sometimes aren't what we intended either. So it's not just the simple act of the interruption, but the, verbal aggression, or, it can be taken in so many different ways.
And it feels horrid, like,
Yeah,
even interruption which is positive and enthusiastic, it still feels like but I think the more we become aware of it, the better. And I often share, like, I come from a family of chronic interrupters. My mum is one of 4 sisters. I honestly don't think I finished a sentence until I left home. And that was seen as a good thing. It's like, well, we all know what everyone's going to say. And as I sort of share with my mum now, is the problem with that is you never actually get to hear yourself think. You never get to work out what, how you feel and what you most think if someone else is constantly doing that. And that grappling for self-awareness and trying to work out what we want to say and trying to find the words, all of that is what allows us to tune into what's most important to us. And so I think, again, it's just that as we become more aware of it, we want to do it less. And as we feel the impact, we want to do it less. But it's not, I don't think it's, like, I know in my own life, I do still interrupt on occasion. But when I don't interrupt is when someone else is trying to think. So for me, I can almost tune in and think, actually, now this is a moment or this feels important, or I can, you know, sense there's a boundary about something, and then it'd be like, oh, okay, now's the time. Or even just a really simple thing, like with my children, you know, I'm sure I interrupt them all the time, you know, but what I make sure I do, the last thing before they go to bed, is I make sure they get attention without interruption. So I might ask them something about their day, and I don't fill in any spaces. So I let them go and then ask them what more, and they say something, and sometimes they don't say much at all. But it's that they know they've got that uninterrupted space that they can fill. But yeah, it is a practice. Yes, Colin.
I think what you've brought up this time is something particularly important. And I describe it as the listening face. And I've spent time with a guy called Nick Askew, and he sits in front of a camera which is literally by his face, and he gives nothing. When he's listening to someone, he gives them nothing. So there's no smiling, no nodding. He gives them full attention. And at times that's, for some people, can be really off-putting. And others, it's, okay, I'm getting that there's nothing. I've really now got to go in and think for myself. But I find that a little bit difficult, to not want to be participating with the other person. But as I'm saying it, it feels like that's my stuff, not for them. I'm trying to do something. And so what's your thoughts, or what other thoughts that people have on what that listening face might be?
Oh, I've got loads. This always comes up, Colin. Thank you for bringing it up. So for me, and this is my feeling, is the most important thing when you're with somebody is the connection between the two of you, and that the person feels that you're with them, that you are listening. And I think that in that Celeste Headley video, you know, I love the line where she says, if you're paying attention, you don't need to pretend that you're paying attention. And I think that facial cues are, you know, those things, I think your read on it is, if I'm doing it for myself, it's just part of my response. If I'm doing it because somebody has said something and it's funny, or I'm engaged and it's just an intuitive response and it's gone as quick as it's come, I think that's just actually a way of connecting. Whereas I think it's, if I'm doing it because I'm like, oh yeah, I'm really interested and I've got to show I'm interested, so I'm going to keep nodding, and I'm going to, you know, or in some ways, I'm sure the exercise Nick does, that's almost like taking it to the other extreme, is if I'm so used to looking outside of myself for approval, or that what I'm saying is okay, if then that is removed, that can feel incredibly challenging, because as you say, I've then got to sort of think, well, what do I think about this? And so I think there's a balance. And I think in a thinking environment, we talk about this word palpable. So for us, the person should be able to sense that we're really attentive and we're really interested. And then I always just say, and as long as then what I'm doing doesn't interrupt that at all. So if somebody says something and it's funny, and then I'm like all of a sudden bowled over, like laughing hysterically, and the other person's already moved on, I've pulled the attention to myself. So I think it's, and it's interesting because in a lot of my courses, I'm quite still in thinking sessions. So I have quite a still presence. And yet people observing sessions will be like, oh my goodness, you're so still. And then when we ask the person who's been thinking with me, they're like, you didn't seem still at all. You felt really, you were just so there. And so I think there's this assumption about what attentive looks like. You know, so I think we are so much more tuned in to actually the feeling tone. Like, is this person paying me attention? Are they interested? And we know. Children are brilliant at this. So you can say to a child, oh yeah, like I'm giving you my attention, and actually your mind, like for me, I'm like, oh, my mind's on dinner, or my mind's on something else. And they just don't buy into it. They're like, no, you're not, mummy. You're not with, you know, they even though I'm there. And that's why when I was saying about that, bringing, where is your attention? It's like, well, where is it? And is it where I want it to be? So yeah, I think that exercise is really interesting, doing the video thing. I think it is a really important exercise for each of us to do, like at some point, is like put on your palpably interested, warm, engaged face and look at yourself in the mirror. Because often what we think as warm, interested, engaged looks thoroughly puzzled or looks really stern. And it's just this like, actually, can we just, would I keep talking or would I keep thinking to that face? And then you can just sort of relax it and be like, oh, actually, this is what I want to do. So yeah, I like the exercise you described, Colin. And I think as long as you can remember that there's a human being that's with you. Right, where am I? I'm going to run out of time. Right, let me share this with you. So as I said, I see listening, so becoming a good listener, for me is a byproduct of being able to pay sustained attention over time. And there's different ways of listening and there's different models, and I've sort of morphed a few of them together to come up with these 5. And in some ways, I just want to share them with you because there will be different people, different relationships, different roles in your life where you have a different application of the listening. And I think sometimes, a little bit to Epiphany's point, it's just knowing, am I consciously and intentionally listening in the way that is most suited to this situation or this environment? And so the first level is where we're sort of listening to protect. And this is often we're trying to control or project into a conversation or into a space. So we're really focused on what captures our attention, and potentially what we're listening for is threats or problems or critique. So we're almost listening with a level of armor up because we feel we're going to be not attacked, that sounds too hard, but we're going to have to defend or justify something. The second or the next sort of type of listening is where we're listening to reply to someone. And I think this is quite a lot of the listening that we do. And so here we're trying to listen out for information. We're trying to confirm or clarify somebody else's thoughts. We're often trying to solve problems. So we're trying to listen in order to be able to give input in order to solve something or fix something. And so we're listening just long enough and listening out for what we need in order to be able to reply to someone else. The next way of listening is predicting. So this is where we're trying to work out where somebody's going to go. So if in our heads, there's this like response of, so what next? Where are they heading? What am I going to need to ask? What's the solution going to be? So we're really trying to create patterns, map outcomes, and make meaning from where, somebody else's content. And then we talk about listening to connect. And for me, this is almost like the starting point of most coaching, conversations. But it's where you really want to understand somebody else. So you're listening so they feel heard. We're listening so that there's the psychological safety for somebody to start feeling vulnerable, to build trust. And we're happy with when we listen in this way that we might not know. We might not have the answers. We might not be solving problems, but we're really listening in order to show the other person that they matter. And so it's, we're quite open then to new ways of thinking or being. And we really just appreciating the person as they are. So what's most important when we listen this way is this connection between the two of us. And then in a thinking environment, we make this distinction between what we're trying to do and the kind of attention that we're talking about, this palpable attention and the non-interruption, is we're listening in order to ignite the thinking. So we're listening to support somebody to generate and sustain their own thoughts without interruption or without input from us. And so we're trying, I suppose, to allow the other person the full range and the full waves of their uninterrupted thoughts in order to be able to ignite, connect, make solutions all for themselves. So we see attention and listening to ignite as being almost like catalysts, you know, that they're both a grounding presence because we're connected with somebody and so they won't interrupt themselves as much, but also that will allow them to ignite their own thoughts. And so it's not that any one of these is good or bad. It just depends on what you're trying to do and what the relationship and the commitment you've made to each other is. But I think when in a thinking environment, because what we're trying to allow for is somebody to think for and as themselves. And so because of that, I'm liberated in some ways from listening to have to protect or respond or predict. You know, I'm purely listening to you in order to be able to help you think for yourself. And then because of that, I get to be better at listening in all the other ways as well. So did I want to have to say anything else before I break? The importance of silence. I only want to touch on this briefly. When people are thinking and when people are normally in conversations, what you can discern as the listener is often there will be like a wave or an energy or a stream of consciousness. So there'll be a flurry of words or thoughts. And then what happens is these waves kind of ebb and flow, you know, but they come, they break, and then they sort of pause. And even in most listening modalities or people that are good at listening, what they listen for is the pause in order to then do something. What we found in a thinking environment is actually the pause is where the person is generating their next thought. So what they're doing is going inwards during those pauses to work out and discern what's most important, what needs to be thought about next, what the next connections are. And so we would honor the pauses just as much as we honor any content that we can hear. So this silence and pauses are so important in helping somebody to keep thinking. And I think it's so rare. It's so rare, one, to not get interrupted in the first place, but to actually have somebody be able to listen and give you attention through your pauses is almost non-existent. And yet what we found is in those moments of pause and in the silence that's generated, somebody will reignite their own thinking and form new connections. And so they're so powerful. And I do love the analogy of like there's waves of thinking, because what waves are, like waves sit on the surface of the ocean and it's the visible part of the movement. But actually there is a great depth of, you know, there's a body of water, isn't there, underneath that? And actually what we hear when we're with somebody is the surface level thoughts that they're sharing. So the language they're choosing to share. And that's only ever a tiny percentage of what's actually going on in their heads and only a tiny percentage of their lived experience. And so actually allowing them to navigate inwardly and their own pauses allows them to navigate that complexity as well and that depth of their own experience. So I would really encourage you to, I guess, just to start noticing them, but also to really honor someone's pauses with the same level of attention as you do their words. And often people will be like, you know, how do you know like that a pause isn't a stop? And my counsel on this is always, if you're paying attention, there's a discernible and distinct difference between a pause which is a stop and a pause where someone's thinking. And it feels different. So a pause where someone's thinking is that they'll still be doing something. It just might not, they might not be putting words to it. But they're completely different things. So a silence where somebody's stopped, what they will naturally do is come back to you, they'll make eye contact and they'll say, oh, yeah, I'm done. Whereas when they're still in the midst of a thought, they'll still be away. So their eyes might be away from you. They might be writing. They might just be sitting, but pondering. And that has a palpable energy to it that you can sense if you're paying attention. So any questions or any thoughts just before I share a couple of tips?
I love that feeling of kind of just sitting with the pause. So I spent a day with Sophie last week, and it's brought all this really fresh into my mind. And I was with somebody yesterday whose job is really, really busy in the NHS, and I was really trying to do this thing with the attention and the listening, and this girl was just at me 100 miles an hour, all these thoughts, and she said, "Gosh, I just feel like I've vomited my whole brain out at you." And there's so many ways I could have responded to that, but I just kind of almost didn't. Like, I kept my attention there, and you could just feel you could feel the wave. You don't take away from that space, and it just feels so powerful, doesn't it? And so different to what we do day to day. So yeah, it's just so fresh, that feeling of the waves, and I love that explanation about the body of water underneath.
And I often use my water. For those of you who've done my courses, you'll know my water bottle. But often when you're with somebody, so you're giving them attention, exactly as Katie said, like you get this flurry of energy. It's like, oh my God, somebody's listening to me, or and there's just this like noise. There's just and it can feel quite, like a really powerful wave. And most of us don't start most conversations with the things that are most important to us. So the things we're scared about, the things we're grappling with, the challenges, the insecurities, the hard things, we don't start with those. We start with these lovely surface level conversations like, "You okay? Yeah, how's work? It's okay." Even, Katie's lady yesterday, that would have just been this like, "Whew, okay, I just want to share this." What's actually most important to people is like down here. And what your attention, sustained attention and non-interruption gives is a chance for somebody to clear through that and actually then start hearing themselves and working out what's most important. And what I always say is every time we interrupt, and that might be with a question or a story from our own life or a response or shock, or I could then add in my drama, of stuff that would add up to it. What we effectively do is top up the glass of water. And so we might never allow somebody to get down to what is most important and actually what they most want to share with you. But that's what non-interruption and attention gifts you and gifts them. And the irony is, it doesn't actually take that long. So people think, "Well, I haven't got that time for that." Actually, you can see people going from here, this overwhelmed flurry of things, to settling. When it's in non-interrupted space, it's actually pretty quick. It's the interruption that makes that like even more energized. Yeah, did anyone else have anything they wanted to share or ask?
So I have a quick question, if I could, in terms of, because I think people are so not used to being with somebody who is being attentive, they often have an expectation of that interruption of some form, whether it's a nod and even when you are doing everything that sort of, they feel that attention, it's almost like they're looking for something else as well. Do you have any sort of hints or tips as to how to help people prepare for it feeling different in the moment?
Yeah, so sometimes information can help. So if it's not going to look like a normal, so if it's something where it's not just a normal conversation and you're not going to, you just say, "Actually, I'm just not going to interrupt as much." You might just frame up and just say, actually, part of what I want to do is actually give you interruption, give you attention and without interruption. And that might feel strange. My experience of this is it feels stranger to us than it does to other people. So our assumptions that people are going to be like, "Oh, this is freaky and weird." But if somebody's really uncomfortable and it's not working, or they I'd either be giving them a little bit of information, or I would almost explain to them why I felt it was important and ask them what do they most need. So I wouldn't just assume, but just little steps. So if I think about like my courses, when we teach attention and we teach giving and receiving attention, we start with a 2-minute exercise. So we learn to give and receive attention for 2 minutes. And for some people, that is extraordinarily hard and extraordinarily uncomfortable to mainly receive it, actually. not so much give it to receive it. And then we go to 5 minutes, and then we go to 10 minutes, then we go to 20 minutes, then we go to 45 minutes. And so I think it's just that allowing people to sit with a little bit of discomfort, but not so much discomfort that they then can't think. So it might just be you do a minute, and then the next time you're with them, you do a bit longer. And so then they get more ease with that. But a bit to Colin's point, sometimes what this does is get people to look inward, and that can be very challenging for people. So if I've spent a lifetime looking outward for other people to tell me that I'm enough, I'm okay, my thoughts need validating, if all of a sudden I don't get that, it can feel like a negation, and that's not what you're trying to do. So I think you just got to work with who you're with. Does that help? Is that?
It does, and it was more the sort of the latter, where people are genuinely sort of assuming that even with everything that you're trying to project, that they're looking for the affirmation. So that is really helpful. Thank you.
Right, I'll share my top tips and then I will let you go. So my top tips on learning to give attention. I think the first thing is genuinely being interested in another person. Like the fact we get to bear witness to somebody else and that they're thinking or sharing, and being really interested in that is the starting place. And I think when we're interested in something, we naturally want to learn more. So we're naturally curious, we're naturally open, we're naturally grateful. You know, we've got almost a unsatiable desire to learn more. And I think it's that, if you think about something you're so interested in, and it's that feeling of, I just want more of this. And if we can imbue our attention to somebody else, that I'm so interested in you, I want to know more, and I want you to be yourself more, that's what people can sense. And so I think it's, can we get really, really interested in the potential in the person who is in front of us? And I think part of that requires us to be open. So not only having an open heart, but an open head and an open mind. So not sitting with certainty. So I suppose being open to uncertainty, being open to not knowing, being open to not being in control. Because the only thing we know really, if we are giving this kind of attention, is we won't know where somebody goes, and can we be at ease, and can we be curious about that. And I think, you know, the curiosity thing is that, you know, what is it we don't know? You know, I think whenever I'm with somebody now is in some ways like, I'll often know already what I think about a topic or a subject. And for me, what I'm most interested in is, what can I learn? What is it? What perspective has this person got that I haven't yet? How can this help me change my mind? How will I be different as a result of having this conversation? And I think that comes from an insatiable curiosity about life and people, and the possibilities that are out there. So being really curious. And then I often say about being grateful. Like for me, one of the true gifts of my life is that I get to bear witness to other people's thinking, and how, you know, amazing people are. And so I think you get to hear and see the wisdom and the knowledge of other people, and to be able to be in the presence of somebody else when they're thinking and when they're being themselves, I think I am really grateful for. And so I think being able to listen, if we can maintain that sense of gratitude for that, it also really helps. But what I'm hoping is maybe there will be one thing from today, just one something. So it might be the non-interruption, or it might be about openness, or something that you think, I'm going to try that one thing, and just see how that works, see how that feels with the people you're with, because it really does have a massive impact on the people that you're around. And as Celeste Headley said, if you are paying attention, you don't need to pretend that you're paying attention, because people know and they can sense that you are. So as always, it's been a joy. I'm aware of our time. If you want to hang around for a few minutes to ask any questions, you're really, really welcome to do so. Unfortunately, there's not going to be a masterclass in October. There'll be one in November because there's a school half term right at the end of October. So it'll be November, but I'll email you the dates. But as always, I end on a quote from somebody that I think sums it up. And this quote's from a guy called David Alsberger, and some of you might have heard it before. But he says that being heard is so close to being loved that for the average person, they are almost indistinguishable. So being heard is so close to being loved. For the average person, they are almost indistinguishable. And I just think that is just such a beautiful presence that we can gift people when we're with them. So thank you as always for being here. If you want to hang around,